Our discussion to the various methods and ways of return calculation on financial instruments and how do we quote those returns as we go along. So primarily this discussion is going to lie around what kind of return nomenclatures we had zeroed down in the previous segment. We're going to look at various returns and measures of returns, right? So the calculations would border around something called as total return, something called as annualized return, then the real versus nominal return, and tax computed return. Four of these separate segments we're going to look at. Let's start with the first one, which is a concept around what is the total return on any instrument, right? Now, let's say we are trying to calculate two different return calculations for two different stocks. Mr. X purchased shares of two companies and received dividends and sold the shares post specified years. Calculate the overall return. So in the first case, you purchased it at 100, then you received 10 and you received 90, right? So this is the outflow, this is the inflow, and this is the inflow. In almost all total return calculations, what you are effectively calculating is, on an overall basis, inflow minus outflow divided by outflow. That's your total return, right? In the case of stocks, you write it as final price, right, plus dividend minus initial price divided by initial price. In other words, if the first example is to be taken, 90 plus 10 minus 100 divided by 100. We bought it at 100. 90 is the final price. So inflow is 90 plus 10, which is 100. So that's going to give me 0% return. That's my 0% return. In the second case, we made final price was 250, dividend was 30 minus 200 divided by 200. So that's 80 by 200. That's 40% return for us in the second case. But remember, this is the overall return. This is the total return that we have calculated. This is the absolute return that you have calculated. It appears like 40% is good, but also note that 40% is over 3 years, right? So now you will extend this calculation into what is typically known as annual return. So you want to find out that what was the equivalent annualized return you would have made in order to get to 40, right? So effectively that annualized return calculation has to come in. In simple terms, what we are assuming that all this is received towards the end, right? And based on that calculation, we're going to try and arrive at what is called as the annualized return. That's an assumption that the dividend is received on the sale value or the holding period. At the end of the third year, you receive 30 rupees, right? So what is your annualized return in this case? If you note, this is going to be very similar to the concept of CAGR we have discussed elsewhere, right? Compound annual growth rate. You start with the initial value, which is 200, and 200 should have grown at a certain rate for the period n years, and that should have given you 30 plus 250, which is 280, correct? If you solve for the rate of return R, that's your annualized return that you're calculating, right? So effectively, what it would work out to be would be 1 plus R to the power n, in this case n being 3, is equal to 280 by 200. You take the nth root or the third root, that implies 1 plus R is equals to 200 by 280 raised to the power 1 by 3. Take 1 on the other side, that implies R is equals to, sorry, this is 280 by 200. I made a mistake in the denominator and numerator. Raised to the power 1 by 3 minus 1. That's the equation you arrive at. That's the same equation that arrives at for the CAGR as well, correct? Final value divided by initial value raised to the power 1 by number of years minus 1 is what was our CAGR calculation as well. That is the annualized return. In other words, if you had invested 200 rupees for 3 years at 11.86%, that would have given you 280, which is what we got from the second investment as such.